It often seems to me there are two kinds of people. There's one kind, they follow instructions, they do what they get told to do without questioning for 1 second what their reason could be for being asked to do something. Unless it's for work or anything, okay, I understand it in that context. However, when it comes to news and things, sometimes nowadays as well in social media, one wonders, and that brings us to the other kind of people. Those are the people who wonder what something is about. Why are they being asked to do something? Why are they being told to believe something? Why are they asked to follow some instructions, to be a certain way, to do certain things? That's the people who look below the surface of the iceberg, so to speak. And I'm seeing myself as one of these people. I want to know what's happening. I want to know reasons for being told certain things, wondering what's going on below the surface. So in today's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind, I'm going to start a 2-part special. And I might have touched on the subject of who controls your mind in episode 8, but I'm going back to that to look more at what influences our mind, as in what or who or how, more like how is our mind manipulated. It's an important one because we have to face it every day nowadays, and some might see it as a fascinating subject while others find it unsettling. And it goes back to how our thoughts and behaviors can be influenced, sometimes for our benefit and sometimes, like in many other cases, for someone else's gain or someone else's advantage. So we are starting our journey into mind manipulation by looking at 2 different things today. And the first one is the difference between what is called nudging and the much darker manipulation practices used by cults, which we went very deeply into in the last episode. And then we look at 10 different strategies of media manipulation outlined by Noam Chomsky. And I would say it's not just used for media manipulation or manipulation by the media, but manipulation by other institutions and people as well. And those strategies, they show how information can be used to steer entire populations. So let's start by looking at or comparing the nudging, the so-called nudging, with manipulation by cults. We will have been nudged at some point in our lives, even if we didn't notice it. Nudging comes from behavioral economics, and it's about gently shaping the way that choices are presented to guide decisions without taking away freedom. One example might be that you might be automatically enrolled in a pension scheme, but you get the choice to opt out. Or you might notice healthy food placed at eye level in supermarkets. That's a way of nudging in action, I suppose. And these examples show nudges that are designed to help people make decisions that are considered good for them or for society. Now let's think back of the period from March 2020. I don't like to use the C word at all. There was a lot of nudging going on. Stay 2 meters apart is for your own good and for not transmitting something to other people. That was one bit of nudging. There was the nudging of stay away from your elderly relatives to protect them and to keep them live longer. There was all these slogans of saving granny and the likes. There was then the nudging of taking a certain product that helps to stop transmission. It's for the greater good. It's for the good of you, your family, the whole society, the world. It was simply a lot of nudging. But sometimes the nudging went a little bit in the dark direction, didn't it? And that almost goes towards the dark direction that the cults might use if we think back to what they do. Let's contrast the nudging with the methods used by the cults. So the cults, as we saw a lot in last episode, rely on deep psychological manipulation, starting with love bombing, then gradually isolating people so that they would stop ties with or cut ties with their families, their friends, the environment they moved around in or grew up in. There was a lot of fear induction, guilt induction, a lot of gaslighting, all to control its members and to make sure that the members stay loyal and stay put and wouldn't leave. Unlike the nudges, which still preserve autonomy or seem to preserve autonomy, the cult tactics systematically strap people off their independence and critical thinking. Well, I'm looking at the nudging again of the past, and I think we were discouraged from critical thinking, big time. We were just supposed to listen to the instructions and how good they are for us and for everyone else, and to just follow them without questioning, without thinking. It was a new thing. It was a so-called emergency thing. And people who were questioning it, they were labeled, name-called, deemed to be something like an outcast. So it was really a mix of nudging with some touches of cultish techniques. Both approaches, like the nudging and the cult techniques, exploit the way our brains work, our cognitive biases, our tendency to conform, and our emotional responses. But the intent is where the difference lies. Nudging often aims at positive outcomes, better health, financial security, or sustainability, for example, while cult manipulation is about control, dependency, and ultimately exploitation. And I let you have your own thoughts about that one. Look at what's happening in your country, be it the UK, be it the US, be it other countries in the world. I let you have your own thoughts about that, because the techniques may very well overlap to extents. But there is still allegedly an ethical framework that's supposed to make the difference. And that's kind of aimed at the ethical framework of the nudging and how it's meant to be used. Now let's shift our focus away from nudging and cults to the second part of the episode, which is about Noam Chomsky and his 10 strategies of mind manipulation. So Noam Chomsky, he is a linguist and a social critic. He described 10 powerful strategies that are used by the media, and I'm saying it again, not only used by the media, to manipulate public opinion. And I'm going through them with one or two examples. You might find your own examples or might remember examples as well. The first technique is distraction. Keep people busy with trivialities so they don't notice important decisions being made in politics or economics. As an example would be endless celebrity gossip dominating the news cycle while major legislation is being passed quietly in the background. Anyone remembers this image from this Coldplay concert recently with this executive or CEO from a big company with was it his girlfriend? Was it his wife? Was it his spouse? I don't know. But that was really blown out of proportion. Even in the bigger news outlets, when I saw it, I just thought, okay, what's the point? Why is this blown up completely out of proportion? What are they hiding was my next question, which usually is my next question, if something is that much blown up in the news. The second technique or strategy is problem, reaction, solution. Create or highlight a problem, wait for public outrage, and then provide the very solution you wanted to implement all along. This is currently going on with digital ID. The problem for that is presented as the incoming people into the UK The public outrage is happening because people are getting fed up as our resources are strapped as they are, along with other problems that may be caused. And the solution that is presented to us now is implementation of digital ID, which will have zero impact on the actual problem. That's my very personal prediction. This is the most current example that I come up with. The other example that I've got here is a government lets crime rate rise, then it introduces tougher surveillance laws that people accept without question. The third technique or strategy is gradualism. Introduce unacceptable measures slowly over time until they become the new normal. The first example that comes to my mind with regards to gradualism is the changes to our finances. You may remember that there is a push for CBDC, which is central bank digital currency. It's not been rolled out yet in the UK. You may have heard it's being rolled out in the EU later this year. Saying later this year, we are actually coming in for October, but they want to roll that out very soon over there. In the UK, we had the consultation that was, I think, last year, when people were asked to say their opinions or state their concerns about CBDC and what it might mean to personal finance. That was kind of a first step to test the waters. It's not that much in the news compared to digital ID and the so-called Brit card at the moment, but they're still cooking something in the background. Plus, there are some changes happening with regards to finances, as in the banks are starting to curb the amounts what people can take out per day and what they can take out per month. I've seen a news item about that. Another thing the banks do or try to do is to say, use your phone for payments. Don't use cards anymore. Do it all on your phone. Number one, convenience. Number two, you don't need to worry about forgetting cards, which is kind of another little bit towards having everything on the phone, moving away from cash, getting rid of cash, which will definitely restrict personal freedoms when we don't have that option anymore, not to mention cyber security concerns and all that. And having the money, the finances on your phone will nicely tie in with digital ID one day. Just saying. Another example here is that they are doing small incremental cuts to social services over years. So they do it gradually, cutting the system down, which would really spark uproar if they did it all at one big push. The fourth strategy or technique is deferring, announcing painful changes as necessary, not right now, but in the future, making them easier to accept when the time comes. And here we are again, digital ID, in brackets Brit card, and CBDC, digital currency, are again a great example for that. The example I have here is raising the retirement age gradually, starting years down the line instead of immediately. But there's a bit of gradualism tying into this again, isn't it? Looking at it. Because they wouldn't raise the retirement age from, let's say, where are we at now? Are we 65 or 67? Let's say from 65 to 70 straight away. No, do it in increments. Up from 65 to 67 and maybe then to 70. Or we do steps in between 68, 69, and then 70. And who knows, we might put it up to 75 one day. We never know with them in power, what they're up to, what their ideas are. And quickly back to digital ID and CBDC. They were talking about those years ago, hinting at them years ago. And we only got to find out more bit by bit by bit. And that's how they're doing it. Not necessarily in the most public domains, But those of us who were more into the question, research, investigate corner, we did hear about it before. The fifth technique or strategy is infantilization. Speak to the public as though they were children, using simple emotional language to bypass the critical thinking. An example here I've got is the political ads using cartoon characters or oversimplified good versus evil narratives. Can you come up with some from March 2020 onwards? I'm sure there's quite a collection of that for that one, because people were spoken to or treated as if we kind of needed special explanation because we wouldn't understand. As the sixth strategy or technique, we have emotional manipulation, another one that was really big in the March 2020 onwards period. Appeal to feelings rather than facts, short-circuiting any rational analysis. For example, using fear-driven headlines about incoming people or terrorism instead of presenting balanced statistics. And we have, obviously, examples again from the March 2020 onwards period. Remember, I don't use the C word. And there wasn't just language used, there were images used. Images to induce fear, images to induce anxiety and worry, fear-inducing voices, fear-inducing wording, and then slogans like stay safe and save granny. You probably still remember those all well, and they fit in well with emotional manipulation. The other emotional manipulation, obviously, is that one that you don't want to associate with those who question everything. You don't want to associate with those who don't take the product, who don't follow the instructions that are so important to save everybody. You probably can relate to that bit as well. Then we've got the seventh strategy or technique is to push ignorance. Keep education and public knowledge at a mediocre level, ensuring people don't fully understand the mechanisms of control. That is definitely going on, and that is definitely the reasons why schools do not teach life skills, why schools do not teach young people to understand how their brain works, how the mind works, and teaching them emotional intelligence. All that should be taught at least from, I would say, at least from the 10th year in secondary education, but definitely at college or university. It should be part of preparing kids, our young people, for life. And it's not just about how the brain works and how the mind works. There's other life skills as well, like growing your own food, running a household, and more importantly as well, personal finance. How the whole finance system works, because it is not how we get presented that it works. With regards to personal finance and how the money works, if anyone heard of Rob Moore, the entrepreneur in the UK, he wrote 2 great books on that. One's called Money and one's called Money Matrix. Both books are offering insights and going in great detail about how finances work, how the financial system works, how money works. And the first one that I've read on the subject was actually Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. That's another one that describes the American way of how it all works a bit better for any kind of listeners who might be in the US. Back to the education system. So what happens with the education system is that underfunded schools, they leave the citizens less able to critically assess political or economic claims. Keeping people in the dark, keeping people ignorant, keeping people, let's put stupid in quotes, that suits them to the ground and they can do what they want, and pushing through things that gradually erode freedoms and the life as we know it. Technique or strategy number 8 is promoting mediocrity, which is a normalization of being vulgar, ignorant, or complacent, making deeper reflection seem unnecessary. That is big time going on in television programs, not only in television programs, but sometimes goes into movies and generally social media, generally other things on YouTube, I suppose, as well. And an example could be reality shows that glorify shallow behavior while discouraging any deeper intellectual engagement. Why does Love Island come to mind right now? I'm sure I'm not the only one who has that thought of Love Island. I'm thinking of a lot of the Channel 4 programs. They are pretty awful nowadays. They used to be interesting years ago, but the quality has really dropped. Strategy or technique number 9 is self-blame. That is convincing people that their struggles are their own fault rather than the result of systemic issues. And this can create depression and passivity. An example here is something that I actually keep hearing about or keep seeing about, which is framing unemployment as a lack of personal effort rather than the result of economic policies. Number 10, the last one, that is knowing people better than they know themselves, which is the use of advances in psychology and neuroscience to predict and influence behaviors more effectively than people can manage themselves. One example is the algorithms in social media that know what content will keep you scrolling even when you want to stop. The addictive TikTok is one great example for that one. An example for the example. One last thing I've added in here, which is not a strategy or anything of Chomsky's, nor something else, is kind of going back to the March 2020 onwards period again. Remember, this is mandatory. This is required. You have to do this. So I looked up the difference between mandatory and compulsory. And while mandatory and compulsory are often used interchangeably to indicate that something is required, there are subtle differences in their connotation and common usage. Mandatory comes from the Latin word mandare, meaning to command or to give into one's hand. This word suggests a requirement that is imposed by a specific authority or rule, such as a law, a regulation, or a policy. It is the most common of the two words and is frequently used in everyday language. One example would be the company's new policy states that all employees must attend the mandatory training session. This implies the requirement comes from a corporate authority. Compulsory comes from the Latin word compellere, which means to compel or to force together. It carries a stronger sense of being coerced or legally enforced, often by a government or a larger system. It's often used in more formal or legalistic contexts. For example, in many countries, military service is compulsory. This implies the requirement is enforced by law. So in essence, mandatory is a requirement by rule, while compulsory is a requirement by force or law. Think of a manager telling you about a mandatory meeting versus a government enforcing a compulsory education. So to summarize, we have seen that mind manipulation or influencing the mind takes many forms. The nudging might encourage us to recycle more or to save for retirement, while cults use manipulation to control and exploit, as we have, again, looked at in depth in the previous episode. And on a larger scale, Chomsky's 10 strategies or techniques show how entire societies can be influenced, often without realizing it. And as this is a 2-part special, a little hint to next week's episode when we will go deeper into more real world examples of mind influencing, mind manipulating tactics. And we look at how we can protect our own mind from being manipulated. And that concludes this week's episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. Share the episode with a lot of people who need help to understand how their mind gets influenced and manipulated maybe into directions they might not want to be manipulated into. Share the episode, download it please as well, and subscribe and follow the podcast on Apple, on Spotify, on Amazon Music, and on YouTube. Tune in again next week, and thank you for listening.